Welcome to TrueStars Stories, the place where the most dramatic and unexpected stories come alive. In today's video, we bring you a journey that will leave you feeling shocked, outraged, and ultimately deeply satisfied. Imagine this. A powerful black woman CEO boards a flight only to have her seat brazenly stolen by a white passenger. At first, it seems like just another unpleasant incident, but it's not. That single moment sparks a chain of explosive events, from blatant injustice to a heated confrontation, and finally, a jaw-dropping twist where the entire crew is forced off the plane, all because they had no idea that the woman they disrespected was actually a powerful chairwoman. Across the 8 chapters of this story, you'll feel the anger of unfairness, the shock of truth revealed, and the satisfaction of seeing justice delivered in the most unexpected way. This isn't just a story about pride and resilience. It's a powerful reminder that you never really know who you're dealing with. If you want more stories filled with drama, emotion, and inspiration, don't forget to hit subscribe to TrueStars Stories right now so you never miss an episode that takes you from surprise to exhilaration. That morning, the airport buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Announcements echoed nonstop. Passengers rushed and shoved, each desperately hunting for their gate. Amid the chaos, a woman walked with calm authority. A tailored black suit, an elegant designer bag, her hair neatly tied in a bun, every step of hers seemed to say to the world, "I hold power here, even if I don't have to prove it." She was Camille Johnson, a renowned black woman CEO in finance and tech. People called her the Iron Lady of Wall Street. But today, she wasn't in a luxury boardroom or standing in front of glowing stock charts. Today, she was just a passenger, simply wanting to sit in the business class seat she had paid thousands of dollars for. Camille reached the boarding gate, handed over her ticket with a polite smile. The world spun in its usual frenzy, but she didn't. She inhaled deeply, ready to enjoy a few hours of quiet flight. Unfortunately, fate had written a very different script. As Camille entered the cabin, she froze. Her business class seat, 4A, was already occupied. A middle-aged white man, heavyset, lounged there comfortably, as if the seat had always belonged to him. A glass of wine in hand, his legs stretched arrogantly, he looked like a king guarding his stolen throne. Camille frowned but kept her smile. She walked up and said, her voice calm yet sharp as a blade, "Excuse me, I believe you're in my seat. This is supposed to be mine." The man looked up, smirked, and scanned her from head to toe with the kind of dismissive, skeptical gaze successful black women knew all too well. "Oh, you must be mistaken. This is 4A. Here's my ticket." He waved it, but it clearly read 14A. Economy. Nearby passengers began to watch. The air thickened, as if everyone was settling in for some free entertainment. Camille still smiled, but her eyes were ice cold, enough to make any decent person shiver. "Sir," she said, emphasizing each word, "my ticket says 4A. Yours says 14A. That extra 1 doesn't just magically disappear." A few passengers chuckled. But the man's face flushed, not with shame, but with anger. He cleared his throat, turned to the flight attendant and declared, "This lady must be mistaken. Someone like her doesn't belong in business class." The words fell heavy, exposing the ugly truth. In his mind, a black woman, even dressed in luxury, radiating authority, couldn't possibly belong in a premium seat. Camille's lips curled into a sly smile. She didn't need to yell, didn't need to argue, because in that moment, she knew the game had just begun. The flight attendant walked over, wearing the kind of forced smile everyone instantly recognizes as fake. A young blonde woman glanced quickly at the man's ticket, then at Camille's. The truth was undeniable. 14A would never be 4A. Yet instead of addressing the obvious, she cleared her throat and turned to Camille. "Ma'am, perhaps you could take another seat for now while we sort this out." The entire business class cabin went silent. A few passengers exchanged glances. Some even smirked. They all knew exactly what was happening, and the stench of unfairness hung thick in the air. Camille tilted her head, her smile no longer gentle but sharp as a knife. "So what you're saying," she asked, her voice crisp and deliberate, "is that I, the person holding the ticket for seat 4A, should give up my seat to a man who clearly holds the wrong one?" The attendant faltered for a moment, but quickly put her professional mask back on. "We're just trying to resolve this smoothly, ma'am." The white man cut in, his tone dripping with arrogance. "See? Even she agrees. Just sit somewhere else. People like you'll be fine anywhere." The words landed like a slap across the cabin. A few passengers grimaced in discomfort, but no one spoke up. Some discreetly pulled out their phones, sensing that a juicy scene was about to unfold. Camille drew a slow, steady breath, and then she laughed. Not loudly, but a low, mocking laugh that made the man flush even redder. "Very well," she said. "If you all insist on turning a simple matter into a circus, then by all means carry on. But let me warn you, this little show won't end well for those who've chosen the wrong side." The tension thickened another notch, and in Camille's eyes, a cold glint appeared, signaling that the real power play had only just begun. The air in the business class cabin had grown so thick, it felt like you could slice it with a knife. A few nearby passengers began to whisper, their voices not nearly as quiet as they thought. "I can't believe this. It's obvious she's right," a woman murmured to her husband. "Yeah, but you saw whose side the flight attendant's on," he replied, his eyes flicking toward Camille with sympathy. Camille heard it all. And she noticed the discreet phones being raised, capturing every moment. In this age, injustice could be exposed with just a single tap on a screen. The white man, sensing the attendant's support, grew bolder. He leaned back deeper into the seat, raised his glass of wine, and sipped with deliberate arrogance. "See, everyone's waiting for you to give up. Nobody's on your side." Camille laughed, the sound crisp and clear, cutting through the heavy air like a bell. "How amusing," she said. "You think their silence means agreement? No, they're silent because they want to see just how far you'll bury yourself in the pit of shame you've dug." A few passengers chuckled, covering their mouths, while the man's face turned crimson with rage. He snapped toward the flight attendant, his voice sharp and commanding. "What are you waiting for? Throw her back to economy where she belongs." The cabin seemed to jolt at his words. Every eye turned to Camille. She sat upright, her gaze blazing as if daring the world itself. "Go ahead, try me. See what happens next." The business class cabin was dead silent, the only sound the low rumble of the engines outside the window. The flight attendant stood frozen, her eyes darting between Camille and the man, as if silently begging the universe for a way out. Camille calmly set her handbag down, adjusted the lapel of her blazer. She didn't need to raise her voice. It was her composure itself that made everyone uneasy, even afraid. "You're telling me to move back to economy?" she said, her tone steady, almost gentle, but loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Let's be clear. I paid for this seat. My ticket says this is mine. Everyone here can see that. And yet you, a man with the wrong ticket, have the nerve to demand that I be removed?" The man cleared his throat, scrambling for ground. That's the airline's problem, not mine. I just need to be comfortable." Camille arched an eyebrow, tilting her head, her smirk sharp enough to cut glass. "Comfortable?" she repeated, then lowered her voice to a near whisper. "You're mistaken. This isn't comfort. This is arrogance. And let me make it plain. This airline has just made a very big mistake by siding with you." The words landed like a death knell. The flight attendant paled, clutching her little notepad with trembling hands. A passenger from the row behind let out an audible, excited, "Wow!" Camille leaned forward slightly, her gaze locking onto the man's, her eyes cold and searing like twin lasers. "You might think this is just a petty argument on a flight. But I promise you, when this plane lands, this petty thing will become the biggest nightmare of your life. And not just for you." Whispers erupted throughout the cabin. The man's mouth opened, but no words came out. Camille, meanwhile, sat back upright, arms folded, a queen reclaiming her rightful throne, and so the first chapter of this drama closed in breathless tension, with everyone knowing that the real storm hadn't even begun. At the front of the cabin, near the cockpit, 3 flight attendants huddled together. Their voices were hushed, but passengers nearby could still catch words like troublemaker, business class, problematic. No one dared to speak too loudly, but the unease was spreading like ink in water. Camille remained seated firmly in her 4A seat, arms crossed, eyes fixed forward, a faint smirk on her lips. She didn't need to yell, didn't need to fuss. Her silence alone was enough to unravel the crew's composure. The white man, after a brief moment of hesitation, puffed himself up again. He leaned toward the passenger next to him, sneering, "Who does she think she is? The Queen of England? Ridiculous." A few people chuckled at his blind arrogance, but most simply looked at him with weary disdain. Everyone could feel it. There was something about Camille that made it impossible to dismiss her for long. Another flight attendant approached, leaning down to whisper nervously, "Ma'am, if you don't mind, could you please sit somewhere else for now while we sort this out?" Camille turned her head slowly, her gaze sweeping over the attendant like an X-ray beam, making the young woman shiver. Then she spoke, her tone as calm as still water, but beneath it a storm raged. "Do you know who I am?" That simple question detonated like a bomb in the cabin. The attendant stammered, lips moving without sound. The white man, however, burst into mocking laughter. "Ha! Exactly. Who even knows who you are? Just a black woman dressed up fancy? Nothing special." Camille slowly turned back to him, her faint smile cutting sharper than any blade. "You're right. You don't know who I am, and that will be the biggest mistake of your life." The silence that followed was so deep that even a pen dropping to the floor would have sounded like thunder. The passenger's eyes began to shift, not looking at Camille with doubt anymore, but with anticipation. Everyone could sense it. An earthquake was about to strike. A heavy silence filled the cabin. All eyes were fixed on Camille, as if everyone was waiting for the answer to the very question she had posed herself. Camille smiled faintly, then reached into her handbag and pulled out a sleek phone. She didn't rush. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Her finger slid across the screen, and immediately it lit up with a cascade of messages and emails. No one could see them clearly, but the corporate seals and CEO signatures from top companies were enough to make several passengers hold their breath. She placed the phone on the small folding table in front of her, lifted her chin, and looked directly at the flight attendant. "You want to know who I am?" Camille said, her voice soft as a whisper. "I'm the person who, with a single tap, can make sure this plane never leaves the ground." The air felt stripped of oxygen. A passenger nearby whispered under his breath, "Oh my God!" The attendant swallowed hard, her eyes widening, her hands tightening around the ticket she held. The white man tried to keep his bravado, but beads of sweat dotted his forehead. "You're bluffing," he muttered, his voice trembling. Camille slowly leaned back in her seat, arms crossed, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Bluffing? No, I'm simply giving you a chance to walk away quietly, before your entire careers go up in smoke." Whispers spread again. Several passengers now openly recorded with their phones, no longer hiding it. Nobody wanted to miss what they sensed would become a historic scene mid-flight. And while the crew scrambled in confusion, Camille sat firm, regal as a fortress. Everyone realized she didn't need to yell, didn't need to threaten. She just needed to wait. And it was that waiting, that terrifying calm, that shook them far more than any shouted words ever could. Camille's words cut straight through the fragile confidence of the crew. One attendant rushed to the back, whispering frantically to the head stewardess, whose face quickly paled. Meanwhile, passengers began to react. A middle-aged man in a suit, clearly a businessman, spoke up. "Excuse me, but she's right. I saw her ticket. That's 4A. And that man clearly has 14A. There's no argument here." A woman chimed in, her tone sharp. "We paid for fair service. If this airline can't deliver, then we'll never fly with you again." A few claps erupted from the back rows. Phones were no longer discreet. They were openly raised, cameras pointed squarely at the crew. Everyone knew the world was now watching every gesture, every word. The white man's face turned crimson as he shouted, veins bulging on his neck. "Shut up, all of you. This is my seat. I'm not giving it up for anyone, especially for the likes of—" But before he could finish, Camille raised her hand, slicing through his rant. The gesture was so commanding that his words died in his throat. "Enough," she said, her voice low, steady, ironclad. "The more you speak, the deeper you disgrace yourself. And believe me, the world outside will never forget the face of a man this shameless." A wave of applause burst forth, louder this time, echoing through the cabin. Some passengers even shouted, "That's right!" And tell him. The crew stood frozen, paralyzed between two choices: defend the wrong or bow to the undeniable truth, and Camille sat there like the ultimate judge. No gavel, no courtroom, just her presence alone. Enough to make the entire cabin wait for her final verdict. The head flight attendant finally stepped forward, her face carefully composed but her eyes betraying panic. She took a deep breath, then bent slightly toward Camille, her voice tense and pleading. "Ma'am, we sincerely apologize for this inconvenience. But to prevent things from escalating further, please be patient for just a moment while we contact the captain and resolve this immediately." Camille looked at her, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Slowly, she tapped her fingers against the armrest, each tap echoing like a hammer striking the crew's nerves. "Not bad," she replied calmly. "At least you still know how to say sorry. But unfortunately, empty apologies can't erase the truth. And the truth here is that your crew just endorsed lies, arrogance, and blatant discrimination in front of dozens of witnesses." The cabin fell silent. Every phone camera remained trained on them, capturing every second. The white man tried one last desperate attempt. She's just putting on a show. Don't listen to—" "Silence." Camille cut him off, her voice not loud, but carrying the weight of thunder. His mouth clamped shut, lips trembling, unable to utter another word. Camille turned back to the head attendant, her eyes blazing as if etching her presence into the woman's very memory. "You have two choices. 1, do the right thing here and now, by principle, by truth. 2, wait until this plane lands and let me deal directly with people you'll wish you had never crossed." The head attendant froze, sweat beading at her brow. A few passengers gasped in excitement, as though watching a power match with the outcome already obvious. Camille leaned back, folded her arms, and closed her eyes, completely in control. She didn't need to say another word. The silence she commanded was louder than any speech, and in that silence, everyone realized the real storm was only just about to break. The sound of polished shoes echoed against the carpet, and then the cockpit door swung open. Every passenger in business class turned their heads. The captain emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp, his face stern but betraying tension at the edges. He walked down the aisle slowly, each step adding weight to the suffocating air. Stopping in the middle, he swept his gaze across the cabin before fixing it on Camille. "Good evening, ma'am," the captain began, his voice deep, striving for calm. "I've been informed there's an issue regarding a seat. I'm hoping we can resolve this quickly and smoothly so the flight can depart on time." Camille opened her eyes and lifted her chin deliberately. The faint smile on her lips wasn't for courtesy. It was a declaration. She owned the moment. "So even the captain had to step in?" she said, her voice resonant yet unhurried. "How amusing. A single business class seat, and your entire system unravels like this." A few passengers chuckled. The captain frowned slightly but nodded. "We want to do the right thing, ma'am. But I need to hear from both sides." The white man immediately cut in, his voice high-pitched with nerves. "Yes, I was sitting here first. She's just overreacting. I have the right to be comfortable, and she should learn to keep quiet instead of causing trouble." Murmurs rippled across the cabin, some passengers laughing derisively. A voice from the back rang out. "Comfortable? By stealing someone else's seat?" Camille tilted her head, her gaze striking the man like a bolt of lightning. Then she turned to the captain, her words sharp as steel. "Captain, my ticket says 4A. His ticket says 14A. The truth is clear. It needs no debate. The issue isn't the seat. The issue is that he believes the color of my skin entitles him to take what I rightfully paid for. And worse, your crew sided with him." The captain swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. He understood instantly. This was no longer a matter of seating. This was a test of justice, of dignity, and perhaps the future of the airline itself. The captain stood silent for several seconds, his mind clearly racing through countless scenarios. The entire cabin waited, nobody daring to breathe too loudly. Finally, he drew a long breath and turned toward the white man. "Sir," the captain said slowly, his voice low and deliberate, "your ticket clearly says 14A, economy class. Seat 4A belongs to this passenger. I must ask you to return to your assigned seat." Applause erupted from the back rows. A few passengers even whistled, shouting, "Finally someone said it!" The white man's face turned crimson. He gripped his wine glass so tightly his knuckles whitened, his voice cracking. You can't do this to me. I'm already sitting here and I'm not moving." Camille chuckled softly, tilting her head toward the captain. "You see? The problem isn't that he doesn't understand. The problem is that he believes the rules don't apply to him. And worse, your crew has indulged that illusion." The captain's face paled. He knew every phone camera was recording each word, each expression. Mishandle this, and by tomorrow morning, the airline's name would plaster headlines across the globe, in the worst possible light. Meanwhile, Camille casually lifted her phone, tapped a few keys and set it on the tray table. The glowing screen displayed an email draft. Passengers nearby could clearly see the logo of a major financial newspaper at the top. "You know," she said lightly, her voice sending shivers. "The media loves stories like this. A white passenger stealing a seat from a black woman CEO and an entire crew either silent or siding with the wrong. That's a headline that sells." The cabin buzzed with murmurs. Some passengers nodded approvingly, others laughed derisively at the man. The captain swallowed hard, then gave a stiff nod. "Ma'am, I understand. I'll make sure this situation is corrected immediately." Camille leaned back, a faint smile curling on her lips. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to threaten. With just a few words, she had tilted the balance of power entirely in her favor. The captain tightened his grip on his cap, then turned to the head flight attendant, his voice hard as steel. "Escort him back to his seat, immediately." The cabin erupted in gasps. A few passengers clapped loudly, some muttered, "Finally," with obvious satisfaction. But the loudest reaction came from the man glued to the seat. The white man half rose, nearly spilling his wine, his face flushed crimson with rage. "You have no right. I paid for a ticket, and I'll sit here. I'm not some criminal you can drag away like trash." His voice cracked with fury, echoing through the cabin. Phones were raised higher now, recording openly. Every eye was fixed on him, and not a single soul stood on his side anymore. Camille calmly lifted her glass of water, took a small sip, then set it down with elegance. A faint smile tugged at her lips, as if this were nothing more than a free comedy show for her amusement. "You call yourself a customer," she said, her tone warm, yet dripping with sarcasm. "But a true customer knows the value of the seat they pay for. You bought economy, yet you demand business. Pathetic. Like a pauper draping himself in a king's robe and calling it a throne." The cabin burst into laughter, applause ringing louder than ever. The man trembled, gripping the armrests as if clinging to the seat for dear life. The captain's voice cut in again, sharper this time. "Return him to his assigned seat. Otherwise, this flight will not proceed." A breathless silence fell. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, then slowly stepped forward. The entire cabin held its breath, while Camille sat upright, arms folded, her fiery gaze fixed on the scene, like a queen awaiting the climax of a play staged solely for her. Two flight attendants stepped closer, their faces taut, trying to appear firm, but their trembling hands betrayed them. The white man instantly lashed out, gripping the armrests with all his strength and screaming hoarsely, "No one touches me! I have the right to sit here. You can't humiliate me in front of all these people." He flailed like a child caught stealing candy, kicking wildly, nearly knocking over a drink tray. Boos and whistles erupted across the cabin. One passenger shouted, "Get him out! We want to fly, not watch this circus." Another chimed in bitterly, "That's right. Enough already! Everyone can see he's in the wrong. What are you waiting for?" Claps, jeers, and shouts filled the air, turning the business class cabin into an impromptu theater. Every phone camera was pointed directly at him, and the invisible audience beyond, the entire world, seemed to be holding its breath for the finale. Camille sat motionless, arms folded, her gaze regal, almost amused. And then, just as the chaos peaked, She calmly reached into her bag and pulled out a gleaming metal card. With a single glance, everyone recognized the powerful logo of the airline's parent company, the very company where she was chairwoman of the board. She set the card down on the tray with a crisp clack, the sound echoing like a judge's gavel. "Enough," Camille said, her voice firm but not loud. "From this moment forward, every decision on this flight answers to me." The cabin plunged into stunned silence. The man's jaw dropped, his words dying before they could leave his lips. The crew turned pale, their eyes wide, as if realizing the storm they had foolishly summoned. And in that single moment, Camille, the black woman CEO whose seat was stolen, flipped the entire game with one decisive move. The moment Camille's metal card landed on the tray, the air seemed sucked out of the cabin. The sudden silence was so heavy that passengers could hear their own heartbeats pounding in their chests. The head flight attendant, who moments ago tried to hold her authority, now shook like a leaf in a storm. She bowed deeply, her voice barely audible. Madam Chairwoman, we didn't know." Camille lifted her chin, her eyes razor-sharp, a smirk curling her lips. "Didn't know?" "Yes, you didn't know who I was. But worse, you didn't even know how to do the right thing, even when the truth was staring you in the face." Whispers rippled across the cabin. Some passengers chuckled, others nodded firmly. The white man sat frozen, his face draining from crimson red to ashen pale, as though every drop of blood had abandoned him. The captain cleared his throat, bowing slightly toward Camille, his voice trembling yet resolute. "Madam, Chairwoman, I apologize for this disgraceful incident. I assure you he'll be removed from this seat, and the entire crew will be held accountable." Thunderous applause erupted, this time rolling through the cabin like celebratory fireworks. One passenger even shouted, "Now that's justice!" Camille didn't move. She only gave a slight nod, her cold eyes slicing through each crew member in turn. None dared meet her gaze. All stared at the floor. In that moment, Camille was no longer just a passenger whose seat was stolen. She had become the ultimate authority on this flight, a queen of the skies, and everyone was forced to bow to her reign. Two attendants stepped forward, their hands trembling, but this time there was no hesitation. They knew full well it wasn't the captain calling the shots anymore. It was Camille. The white man clung to the armrests, screaming in desperation, "I'm not going anywhere. You'll all regret this. I'll sue every single one of you." Camille sat upright, her gaze cold as ice. She lifted her chin and flicked her hand, the gesture of a judge passing sentence. "Remove him." "That's enough," laughter rippled through the cabin. A passenger behind mocked loudly. "Sue, please?" The courtroom would laugh him out before he even started. The attendants grabbed his arms. He thrashed wildly, shouting as though his imaginary throne was being ripped away. But this time, no one pitied him. Phones rose high across the cabin, their red lights blinking like dozens of unblinking eyes, broadcasting his humiliation to the entire world. Camille sipped her water, her voice calm, deliberate, carrying to every corner of the cabin. How ironic that a man who thought he could humiliate a woman because of her skin color now makes himself the laughingstock of millions. Applause thundered again. Passengers nodded, smiling with satisfaction. The man was dragged to his feet, his face beet red, sweat dripping down like rain. He stammered, trying to speak, but the roar of clapping and cheers drowned him out completely. Camille simply watched, her gaze regal, like a queen witnessing her enemy being marched to the gallows. The two attendants staggered as they dragged the man down the aisle. He screamed, kicked, and fought, but it was useless. His shouts were drowned out by a wave of cheers, clapping, and whistles from the passengers. "Go on! Back to economy where you belong!" one man shouted. "Justice at last!" a woman cried out, her voice ringing with the excitement of a stadium crowd. The man flailed, his face beet red, sweat pouring down in rivulets. He was no longer the smug, confident businessman from moments before. He had become a pitiful clown, publicly disgraced in front of the world. Phones recorded every humiliating second, and everyone knew. Within minutes, this would be plastered across social media, trending for all the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, the crew stood frozen, Faces drained of color. Each cheer, each clap from the passengers struck them like a hammer blow to the chest. They knew. By tomorrow, when this footage went viral, their careers would be nothing but ashes. Camille remained still, her eyes following the spectacle with the calm detachment of a judge. When the man was finally dragged out of business class, she gave a slight nod, as if concluding a public trial. The cabin erupted once more. A passenger shouted, "Bravo! That's a real powerful woman right there." Thunderous applause rolled across the cabin. The crew, however, stood silent, heads bowed, none daring to meet her gaze. Camille's lips curled into a faint smile, her cold eyes sweeping over their faces, a silent warning. Your turn to face judgment is coming. The cabin door slammed shut behind the man, leaving business class in a tense, charged silence. Applause lingered for a moment, then faded into quiet anticipation. Every eye now turned to Camille. She slowly pivoted, her gaze sweeping over the crew huddled near the aisle. She didn't speak right away. That silence alone made their hearts pound harder than any accusation could. Finally, Camille spoke. Her voice was low, deliberate, but sharp as steel. "You call yourselves flight attendants. But tonight you forgot your true duty. You're not here to pour wine or to plaster on fake smiles. You're here to protect fairness for passengers. And what did you do? You sided with a man who was blatantly wrong and tried to push out a customer with the rightful ticket. And the only reason? It was because I'm a black woman." A heavy murmur rippled through the cabin. Passengers nodded, their eyes filled with disdain for the crew. The head attendant tried to stammer out, We're truly sorry. It was just a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Camille cut in, her voice cracking like a whip. "Don't insult my intelligence. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was prejudice. It was cowardice. And it was your failure to do what was right." Scattered applause broke out among the passengers. No one stood on the crew's side anymore. Camille leaned back, her voice dropping lower, but each word as sharp as a blade. "You should pray that when this plane lands, I'm merciful enough not to end your careers overnight." The crew went pale, heads bowed, lips sealed. A passenger whispered under his breath, "My God, she's not someone to mess with." And thus, Chapter 4 closed in suffocating silence, with everyone realizing the real storm was still yet to come. As the man was dragged out of business class, the noise slowly subsided, replaced by the clicks of cameras and the buzzing of phones. Passengers weren't just recording, they were posting. "Man, when this clip hits the internet, it's going to blow up," a young man whispered to his friend, eyes glued to his screen. Minutes later, notifications began popping up. Video shared, 5,000 views in 2 minutes. News was spreading faster than the plane could ever take off. The first comments appeared. "Unbelievable this happened in business class. Black woman CEO? Who is she? We need to know now." The crew caught sight of the screens, their faces draining of color. The head attendant clenched her fists, exhaling shakily, realizing it was far too late for excuses. Camille, however, was different. She sat tall, her eyes glowing beneath the cabin's soft lights. When a passenger showed her the live video trending online, she simply smiled faintly, sipped her water, and murmured, "Perfect. Justice is no longer confined to this cabin. Now the whole world is a witness." Applause erupted again, not just for what had happened, but because everyone realized they were sitting at the epicenter of a global media storm. The crew bowed their heads, trembling. And Camille sat regally amid the flashing screens. Fully aware that her power had gone beyond Seat 4A, it was now soaring across the skies of social media itself. Inside the cockpit, the intercom crackled urgently. A priority signal from ground control came through. "Flight 472, we've received reports of a serious incident in business class. Video footage is spreading across social media. We require a full report immediately." The captain's grip tightened on the controls, sweat beating at his temple. He glanced at the crew, his face cornered and pale. In the cabin, the attendants whispered frantically, their professionalism unraveling. One gasped, voice trembling, "Oh my God. Management already knows. We're finished." The head attendant tried to steady herself, but her hands shook violently, her voice hoarse. "If this video spreads further, by tomorrow, This entire crew will be suspended. Camille heard every word. She leaned back, crossing her legs with regal poise, her icy gaze sweeping over them as if watching a tragic play unfold. She let out a soft chuckle, her voice carrying evenly through the cabin. You're worried? Good, worry, because today's lesson isn't about seat 4A. It's about how you turned injustice into procedure. And now, that very procedure is devouring you. Applause thundered once more, this time mixed with mocking laughter aimed at the crew. One passenger even raised his phone and shouted, "Live streams at 20,000 views! You're famous now." The crew bowed their heads lower, not daring to speak another word. They knew their careers were crumbling in real time. Meanwhile, Camille closed her eyes, that faint enigmatic smile on her lips, like a playwright who already knew exactly how the final act would end. The radio crackled again, more urgent this time. Flight 472, this is Operations Control. The video is spreading at explosive speed. Media outlets are already contacting us for statements. The crew is ordered to contain the situation immediately and ensure no further incidents occur. Report now. The captain swallowed hard, glancing toward Camille, then at the head attendant. His voice rasped with unease. They want a report. But what can we even say? The head attendant's hands trembled, sweat dripping as she stammered. We were wrong. Everything was recorded. We have no excuse. Camille opened her eyes, her voice cutting through the silence like steel. Then report the truth. A white passenger stole the business class seat of a black woman CEO, while the crew stood silent or enabled it. And now, dozens of witnesses and hundreds of thousands outside have seen it. She paused, then let a faint smile curve her lips. But if you want to salvage an ounce of dignity, add this. When the chairwoman of the airline's board stepped in, the truth was brought to light. Whispers rippled through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, admiration flashing in their eyes. A few began clapping, then the entire cabin rose with thunderous applause and cheers. The crew stood frozen, hollow, knowing there was no way back. The radio called again, but its signal was drowned beneath the roar of approval echoing through the cabin. Camille leaned back in her seat, her eyes gleaming, her smile serene. Let them know who's really running this flight. Inside the cockpit, the captain received another urgent signal from ground control. The controller's voice came through, frantic, tinged with panic. Flight 472, the situation is spiraling. The video has surpassed 1 million views. You are ordered to contain this immediately, calm passengers, and absolutely prevent any further scandal. The captain lowered the radio, his hand trembling. He knew. Every eye in business class was no longer on him. It was on Camille. Camille smiled faintly, her eyes sharp as blades as she turned toward the crew. Leaning forward, her voice was low yet thunderous. You pushed me aside, sided with a man who was wrong, and when the truth came out, you bowed your heads with apologies. Do you think apologies are enough? No. She rose to her feet, each deliberate step striking the floor like a drumbeat. The cabin fell silent, save for the clicks of dozens of recording phones. This isn't just a seating dispute, Camille said, her gaze slicing through the attendants. This was a test of integrity, and you failed miserably. One attendant broke down, sobbing, shoulders shaking uncontrollably. The head attendant stared at the floor, lips moving but unable to form words. Camille turned to the passengers, her tone fierce and commanding. The witnesses here have seen it. The world outside has seen it. When this plane lands, this entire crew will face consequences, and I will personally ensure justice is done. The cabin erupted in thunderous applause. A passenger shouted, "Bravo! Now that's real justice." The crew hung their heads, as though hearing their own death sentence. Camille returned to seat 4A, settling in with regal poise. Folding her arms, a faint smile played on her lips. To everyone present, she was no longer just a passenger. She was the supreme judge, turning this flight into a courtroom and this moment into a historic verdict. The cabin speakers crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. Our flight will be departing in just a few minutes. The female announcer's voice trembled, betraying the panic she tried to conceal. Business class was heavy with tension. The crew kept their heads down, every step drawing scornful stares from passengers. Some whispered just loud enough to be heard, "Serves them right. By tomorrow. This will be all over the news." Meanwhile, Camille sat tall in seat 4A, like a queen who had just restored order to her kingdom. The warm cabin light fell across her face, illuminating her with regal authority. She calmly opened her laptop, unfazed by the chaos left behind. The screen filled with emails, news updates about the viral video, headlines already buzzing. Black woman CEO puts airline crew in their place. Sky drama, white passenger dragged from business class seat. Passengers around her reclined, breathing easier, yet no one could take their eyes off Camille. She had become the absolute center, a living symbol of justice and power. Camille sipped her water, closed her eyes, and smiled faintly. The world outside was buzzing, social media ablaze, and inside this cabin, everyone knew. This flight no longer belonged to the airline. It belonged to her. The plane began to taxi down the runway. Engines roared, but even that thunder couldn't drown out the feeling. Camille had turned the skies into her own stage. The engines roared steadily as the plane sped down the runway. But inside business class, silence was giving way to murmurs of curiosity. A woman in row 5 whispered to her husband, "Who is she really? Did you see the card she pulled out?" That was the parent company's logo. The man nodded, his eyes still locked on Camille. "If that's true, then we just witnessed one of the most powerful figures in the entire airline industry. This isn't ordinary." A younger passenger, unable to contain himself, leaned forward and asked aloud, "Excuse me, but I have to ask, who are you really?" The cabin fell silent, every eye fixed on her. Camille opened her eyes, set her laptop aside, and slowly lifted her head. She let the silence linger, like an actress preparing her final decisive line. "You want to know who I am?" she said, her voice calm, deep, unwavering. "I'm the person whose single signature can alter the fate of an entire airline." A ripple of shock swept the cabin. Some passengers gaped, others widened their eyes in awe. Then came applause, this time not just in support, but in reverence. Camille's lips curved into a smirk as she continued, "But don't see me as just a title. I am living proof that no matter how hard the world tries to strip away your place, you can take it back." 100 times over. Thunderous applause filled the cabin, loud enough for even the captain to hear from the cockpit. Passengers shouted, "The Iron Lady!" The black woman CEO, authentic. Camille smiled, leaning back against her seat. She didn't need to say more. In just a few sentences, she had turned curiosity into absolute admiration. The engines hummed steadily as the plane climbed higher. Passengers gradually quieted down, yet their focus remained entirely on Camille. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. An urgent message from the airline's internal system lit up the screen. "Camille, we've seen the video. It's exploding. The entire board wants to speak with you the moment the plane lands. International media is circling. This is now a top-level crisis." Camille glanced at the screen, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. She closed her laptop, set it aside, then lifted her gaze toward the cabin door, as if she could already see the executives trembling in their boardroom far below. A curious passenger leaned over and whispered, "What was that? Any new updates?" Camille smiled, her voice warm yet laced with irony. "Oh, nothing serious. Just that the people on the ground are far more nervous than we are up here in the sky." Laughter broke out across the cabin. Some clapped, others whistled. The tension had transformed into a strange exhilaration, as if they were witnessing history in the making. Camille slipped the phone back into her bag, her eyes gleaming with pride. She thought to herself, "Let's see who still has the courage to face me when we land." The soft glow of the business class lights reflected on Camille's face, making her look like a general calmly plotting strategy in the heart of a storm. The plane sliced through the night, but her mind was ablaze, each move already mapped out with precision. She quietly opened a note on her phone. The first line read, "Plan after landing. Crew, report the entire incident to the disciplinary board. Document complicity, discrimination, and lack of professionalism. Airline, demand an immediate emergency meeting with top leadership. Push for reform in training and crisis handling procedures. Media. Let social media keep building momentum. Upon landing, one short statement from her would be enough to ignite the firestorm further. Camille paused, smiling faintly. In her mind, it was all a chessboard. The very people who had dismissed her minutes ago were now trembling pawns, waiting for her final move. A young passenger nearby spoke softly. "Ms. Camille, I've never seen anyone turn injustice into such a brilliant victory." Camille tilted her head, her smile softening. "No one gets to define your worth but you. If you let others take your place, you've lost before the game even began. But if you stand firm and fight, the whole world will have no choice but to listen." Applause rose again, this time not loud and wild, but warm, steady, like a promise from those who had witnessed it all. Camille closed her eyes. Though sleep never came, she was waiting for the moment the wheels touched the ground, when the real storm would begin. The wheels slammed onto the runway with a thunderous thud, like the opening shot of a new battle. Engines roared as the plane slowed, but inside business class, no one exhaled in relief. They all knew the real fight had just begun. Through the window, the lights of the airport flickered, revealing swarms of people pressed behind barriers. Cameras, TV crews, and cell phones lifted high, their flashes exploding like an artificial galaxy of stars. A passenger shuddered, whispering, "My God. Look at that. It's like we landed at Hollywood." The crew's faces drained of all color. The head attendant clutched her notepad tightly, sweat dripping, knowing every step outside would be a public judgment. Camille, however, was different. She calmly closed her laptop and rose. Her black suit sharp, her bun immaculate, every movement radiated the presence of a head of state stepping onto a red carpet. A trembling attendant stammered, "Madam, perhaps we should escort you—" Camille raised her hand, cutting her off. "No need. From now on, I walk alone, and you will follow behind me as witnesses to the consequences you created." The cabin held its breath. Passengers stared, then suddenly applause erupted in unison, not just supportive applause, but reverent, honoring. When the plane door swung open, the blinding light of dozens of cameras poured in. And Camille Johnson stepped out, not as a passenger, but as a symbol walking onto the world's stage. The moment Camille's heels touched the aircraft steps, a storm of lights erupted. Dozens of cameras swung toward her, microphones thrust forward like a forest of steel, swaying in chaos. "Ms. Camille, can you tell us what happened on that flight? Is it true a white passenger stole your seat? Do you plan to sue the airline?" Questions fired like bullets. The crew trailed behind her, pale as ghosts, like convicts being marched into the public square. Camille stopped midway on the improvised red carpet of the airport. She lifted her chin, her eyes blazing beneath the flashes, and for a brief moment the noise seemed to hush. "Yes," she declared, her voice strong and commanding. "My seat was taken." But the issue was never just about a seat. It was about arrogance, prejudice, and the failure of an entire crew to uphold their duty. Gasps, murmurs, the relentless click of cameras. Camille paused, then let a razor-sharp smile touch her lips. "But remember this. Justice doesn't need a boarding pass. It doesn't care about seat class. Justice only requires truth. And today, the whole world is a witness." The press erupted, cheers, applause, frantic calls to editors. In that instant, the airport ceased to be an airport. It became a historic press conference. Camille moved forward, calm and deliberate, each step like she was walking onto a victory stage, while the crew followed behind, heads bowed, unable to meet the gaze of the world. Just hours after Camille stepped off the plane, the world's media was in uproar. Major outlets blasted headlines across screens. "Black woman CEO has her seat stolen on flight, and her response shocks the world." Sky Justice, airline faces. Global crisis after business class incident. The hashtag Black Woman CEO flooded social media, rocketing to the #1 global trend in just 2 hours. Clips spread at lightning speed, accompanied by furious and admiring comments alike. No one should ever underestimate women of color. Camille proves it. This wasn't just a flight. It was a lesson for the entire world. Evening broadcasts replayed the moment Camille descended the aircraft steps, flashes exploding around her, over and over as if it were history captured live. Commentators hailed her as the Queen of Justice in the skies. Meanwhile, the airline's headquarters dissolved into chaos. Emergency meetings stretched into the night. Executives trembling under public outrage, terrified not just of losing customers, but of watching decades of reputation go up in flames. Camille, however, sat in a luxurious hotel suite overlooking the city lights. In her hand, her phone buzzed nonstop. Exclusive interview requests, speaking invitations, partnership offers pouring in from every corner of the globe. She smiled faintly. Hours ago, someone dared to steal her seat. Now, the entire world was scrambling for a seat just to hear her speak. By the next morning, Camille's story had broken free from the confines of an airline scandal. It spread like wildfire, transcending the service industry and striking at the heart of millions worldwide. Politicians began to weigh in. A U.S. Congresswoman tweeted, "We just witnessed a textbook example of the discrimination women of color endure." Camille didn't just defend her seat, she defended justice for all of us. In Europe, headlines read, "From business class to parliament, flight incident sparks new equality movement." Students, activists, and entrepreneurs of color shared her image with the caption, "She took her seat back and gave us all one." The airline, scrambling, issued a public apology. But instead of calming the storm, their words fueled more outrage, criticized as cold, scripted, and insincere. Camille, meanwhile, sat in a hotel conference room, fielding calls from corporate leaders, political figures, and social organizations. She didn't speak much, just listened, took notes, and smiled, because deep down she knew this flight hadn't just altered the fate of a crew or an airline. It had made her the symbol of an era. The next day, the city's largest convention hall was packed to capacity. Journalists crowded in, cameras lined the aisles, flashes blazing like lightning in a storm. Live broadcasts streamed to dozens of countries, millions of viewers waiting in anticipation. Camille emerged in a sleek black suit, her stride steady, her face radiant. As she stepped up to the podium, the room fell into a hush. She placed her hand on the microphone, her gaze sweeping across the sea of reporters before locking onto the camera lens, as if she were speaking directly to the world. "Yesterday," she began, her voice strong and clear, "I only wanted to sit in the seat I paid for. But instead of fairness, I met arrogance, prejudice, and the silence of those who were supposed to defend what was right." Murmurs rippled, then faded. Camille pressed on, her voice rising with power. "This is not just my story. This is the story of everyone who has ever had their place stolen because of their skin, their gender, or their origin. Yesterday I reclaimed my seat, but today I stand here to tell the world, it is time we reclaim every seat that has been taken from us." The hall erupted in thunderous applause, echoing through live broadcasts. Passengers from yesterday's flight stood, clapping endlessly, some with tears in their eyes. Camille raised her hand high, delivering a final line that shook the room. "And remember this, justice is never downgraded." The moment Camille finished her speech, the applause didn't just thunder through the hall, it echoed across the globe via live streams and social media. Millions rose to their feet in front of screens, as if they too were present, witnessing history. On Twitter, the hashtag #OsChartJustice, never downgraded, shot straight to the top worldwide. Headlines flooded in within hours. Camille Johnson, from passenger to the voice of a generation, a black woman CEO turns business class. Into a courtroom, an injustice into a global movement. Politicians, artists, athletes, business leaders, all voiced support. A Hollywood star tweeted, "I once dreamed of someone standing up like this." Today, I saw it in Camille. Students across university campuses carried her image high during marches, chanting in unison, "Justice never downgraded." Meanwhile, the airline scrambled to hold a press conference. but every word was drowned out by the resonance of Camille's message. The public no longer cared about scripted apologies. They only cared about the truth she had spoken. In her hotel suite, Camille sat quietly by the window, gazing at the city glowing with lights. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Invitations from the United Nations, from human rights groups, from corporations begging her to join their advisory boards. She sipped her tea, a faint smile on her lips. Camille knew she hadn't just reclaimed seat 4A on that flight. She had reclaimed a seat in the hearts of the world. Weeks later, Camille Johnson's story was no longer just breaking news. It had become history. Images of her holding up the metal card on the flight, striding through a storm of flashes at the airport and delivering her earth-shaking speech, graced the covers of major magazines: Time, Woman of the Year; Forbes, a global icon of justice. The United Nations formally invited her to speak at the Global Equality Summit, introducing her not as a CEO, but as the woman who turned a business-class seat into the seat of justice for the world. Airports across America displayed posters bearing her words: "Justice never downgraded." The disgraced flight crew had long since been permanently dismissed. Their names forgotten, erased, but Camille's name, Camille Johnson, echoed everywhere, a symbol carved into memory. At a grand ceremony, thousands rose to their feet as Camille stepped onto the stage. Applause thundered endlessly. She lifted her head high, her eyes blazing, smiling as the announcer proclaimed, "Presenting, not just a leader, but a living legend, Camille Johnson." In that moment, it became clear the story hadn't ended on that flight. It would be retold for generations, a reminder that justice can begin with something as small as a seat, and with one woman who dared to rise. That night, after the bright lights of the ceremony had dimmed, Camille returned to her quiet room. Outside, the city still glittered, social media still raged like wildfire, but she sat silently by the window, gazing at the endless stream of headlights below. In that rare moment, she was no longer the living legend, no longer the global icon of justice. She was simply a woman reflecting on the path she had walked. A seat stolen, an injustice exposed, and a world awakened. Camille smiled, sipping her tea. She knew she had just written a story that would be told for years to come. But she also knew this was no ending, because somewhere out there, thousands, millions of other seats were still being taken. And those who should be sitting in them, those without a voice, still needed a Camille to rise for them. She whispered softly, as if making a promise to herself, "My seat was just the beginning. This journey has only just begun." Beyond the window, dawn broke. The first rays of light streamed into the room, casting a golden glow around her. And so the story closed, but its echo lingered in every heart, a sense of satisfaction, a spark of inspiration, and a question hanging in the air. Which seat will Camille reclaim next?